A really profound transformation is currently underway on the global chessboard. I mean, we're witnessing the meticulous construction of an entirely new geopolitical architecture, one that's being shaped right now by sheer economic necessity, military strategy, and a major shift in the balance of world powers. So today, we're going to unpack this emerging Russia, China, and Iran strategy. We're going to act as objective international relations observers here. We'll analyze this complex triad not through any sort of political bias, but by examining the cold, hard facts of global energy markets, long-term diplomacy, and economic sanctions. Seriously, we are watching a modern-day historical documentary unfolding right before our eyes.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the new multipolar alliance. Second, sanctions and power balance. Third, the Strait of Hormuz dilemma. Fourth, economic survival versus military strategy. Fifth, Russia's geopolitical security fears. And finally, number 6, a three-way diplomatic settlement.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the new multipolar alliance.
Now, drawing on some truly incredible exclusive reporting from the Sonophiles website, which provided the essential source material and deep geopolitical analysis for our explainer today, we have to look at a profound joint declaration. Following a very critical summit, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping explicitly called for, and I quote, the construction of a multipolar world and a new model of international relations. And this wasn't just standard diplomatic rhetoric. This declaration was backed by 40 different cooperation agreements spanning multiple sectors. It was a very direct, calculated response to mounting Western pressure and shifting dynamics in global diplomacy.
But to really understand this, we have to look at the crucial event that immediately preceded that joint declaration, which actually happened behind closed doors. U.S. President Donald Trump had just visited Beijing. And during these meetings, the negotiations went way, way beyond simple trade disputes. The dialogue fundamentally focused on Iran, the security of global energy routes, sanctions, and the broader balance of power. According to the analysis, the strategic aim here was an attempt to partially separate Beijing from the Russian-Iranian axis. Well, this calculated maneuver acted as a powerful catalyst. It immediately sparked concern in Moscow about a potential American-Chinese understanding that could end up leaving Russia totally isolated.
So this breaks down a truly fascinating contrast in how these two massive global powers approach Iran. On one side, you have China. They remain politically supportive, but militarily, they are very cautious. They completely avoided direct military entanglement during recent regional confrontations because at the end of the day, they strictly prioritize their economic interests and their massive dependence on Gulf energy supplies. But then on the other side, you have Russia. They are deeply invested in Iran, both politically and militarily, and they severely fear global isolation. However, Russia simultaneously depends heavily on China for oil and gas sales and overarching military coordination. So China is performing this masterful balancing act, staying economically connected to Iran while completely avoiding military escalation.
Moving on to Section 2, Sanctions and Power Balance.
If we look at the chronological breakdown of Iran's economic degradation, we can clearly see how this history builds directly into our current reality. Over the years, we see the steady accumulation of very severe Western sanctions. Stretching back decades, we have the compounded impacts of prolonged war and regional conflict. The ongoing results of all this have been just devastating capital flight and severely damaged infrastructure. And in the present moment, all of this has culminated in a drastic decline in their vital oil revenues. As neutral international relations experts observing this timeline, it is overwhelmingly clear that external economic forces have systematically degraded Iran's economy, totally reshaping their geopolitical posture.
Hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, just pause for a second and really absorb the sheer scale of that number. Estimates suggest that the cumulative economic losses suffered by Iran due to this historical combination of sanctions, conflict, and declining revenues reach into the hundreds of billions. This massive, crippling figure is absolutely the driving force behind Tehran's current strategic behavior. It's virtually impossible to understand their international actions without first understanding this catastrophic economic baseline.
That brings us to Section 3, the Strait of Hormuz dilemma.
The Strait of Hormuz is defined as a highly strategic maritime transit corridor that heavily influences global shipping routes and international energy supplies. But the crucial thing to understand is that for Iranian leaders, this is so much more than just a geographic definition on a map. Deeply scarred by the economic devastation we were just talking about, Tehran increasingly views the strait as one of its very few remaining tools capable of actually exerting leverage over the global economy. They know that if the world absolutely depends on this critical passage for energy, well, Iran holds a card that can potentially offset its economic isolation.
And this right here creates a fascinating, high-stakes strategic contradiction between Iran and China. Tehran's strategy increasingly leans toward implementing financial fees or charges in exchange for keeping Hormuz open. They're essentially trying to extract direct economic benefit and compensation for their sovereign control. Contrast that with Beijing's strategy, which absolutely demands unpoliticized, perfectly stable waterways. China fears that any permanent restrictions or levies on Hormuz would destabilize global trade, drive oil prices through the roof, and ultimately damage Chinese industry and economic growth. So it's a fundamental clash. Tehran's desperate need to monetize the strait versus Beijing's absolute requirement for stable, affordable global trade.
Section 4. Economic survival versus military strategy.
To maintain internal cohesion, any nation needs resources, and Iran's requirements right now are urgently basic. They need stable oil revenues and trade access literally just to keep the lights on. They must maintain foreign currency reserves just to participate in any level of international commerce. They desperately need funding to pay domestic salaries, and they require massive capital to fund reconstruction efforts and get some relief from decades of post-war destruction. Without these basic financial pillars holding up the economy, the internal pressure on the Iranian government intensifies to a breaking point.
And this brings us to one of the most critical takeaways of this entire explainer. For Tehran today, economic survival has become just as important as military survival. Historically, a nation's defense strategy focuses outward on foreign military threats. But when a state's internal financial structure begins to buckle under the weight of hundreds of billions of dollars in losses, that domestic financial pressure actually becomes an existential threat equal to any foreign army. Without basic economic continuity, the risk of domestic unraveling is profound.
Now, let's look at this from another angle in Section 5, Russia's geopolitical security fears. When we look at the Kremlin's exact security calculations, we can see that for Russia, Iran isn't just a trading partner. It is a vital, stabilizing pillar in Moscow's broader multipolar defense strategy. Looking at their threat breakdown, a massive 40% of their concern centers on the catastrophic geopolitical scenario of regime change in Tehran. Another 30% focuses on the resulting instability that would undoubtedly spill over near the Caucasus and Central Asia. 20% is dedicated to the inevitable rise in regional militant activity if a power vacuum forms, and the final 10% involves the management of massive refugee flows across the region.
Ultimately, Moscow's biggest fear is a financially crippled Iranian state that becomes vulnerable to foreign exploitation and domestic unrest. But here is the major catch. Russia completely lacks the economic capacity to rescue Iran alone. They just cannot simply write a check to solve Tehran's crisis. So, because an unpredictable, collapsing state on their southern border is completely unacceptable, but an independent Russian bailout is impossible, Moscow is forced to seek external economic anchors to prevent a total collapse. Basically, they need a partner with very deep pockets.
Which leads us to Section 6, a three-way diplomatic settlement.
Let's dive right into the mechanics of this proposed settlement. What we are seeing are highly symbiotic, calculated roles emerging for each specific nation. Iran's role is to retain its strategic influence over the Strait of Hormuz, but crucially by adopting a much more flexible and measured approach to escalation. In exchange, China steps in to play the economic savior, guaranteeing continued economic and trade cooperation alongside massive investments in reconstruction. And Russia? Well, Russia completes the triangle by providing comprehensive political defense and overarching regional security backing. It is a meticulously designed balance of economic, military, and strategic needs.
So, the real question is, how does this actually work in practice? The practical terms of the settlement unfold in three main steps. Step 1. Instead of a catastrophic full closure of Hormuz, Iran implements limited, regulated maritime access. It keeps the threat alive, sure, but it keeps the oil flowing. Step 2. In return, China establishes selective economic arrangements and works on back-channel avenues for sanction easing, providing Tehran with the financial lifeline it desperately needs. Step 3. All three parties strictly ensure they avoid any direct, large-scale confrontation with the United States. It's honestly a masterclass in pragmatic compromise, addressing Iran's economic desperation while preventing global escalation.
And we already have concrete diplomatic proof that this arrangement is moving out of theory and into reality in international waters. According to the deep analysis from the Cinephiles, Iran has previously permitted the passage of specific ships linked to China through the Strait of Hormuz, and this occurred following direct, behind-the-scenes diplomatic coordination with Beijing. This is proof that the framework of economic continuity in exchange for controlled maritime stability is already being actively tested and implemented right now.
This incredibly delicate balancing act builds Russia into the ultimate geopolitical linchpin. They are actively acting as the vital mediator, essentially translating Iranian revolutionary ideology into terms that are compatible with Chinese economic pragmatism. Plus, they are taking the lead in diplomatically defending Iran at the United Nations, running interference on the global stage. Simultaneously, they're utilizing this crisis to strengthen their own overarching energy and political coordination with Beijing. So Russia ensures that Iran's internal order holds, while simultaneously ensuring China's global trade routes remain safe.
Now, as objective analysts, we absolutely must acknowledge the major ongoing variable in this entire equation: the United States. The U.S. continues its long-term strategy of utilizing heavy sanctions and relentless financial pressure. Because of this dynamic, traditional military posturing has really taken a back seat. Economic access